Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friends of the Force, a Star Wars podcast. I am your host, Brad Whipple, and we are here to celebrate the launch of From a Certain Point of View, The Empire Strikes Back. 40 authors, 40 stories, celebrating one of the most loved and revered films of the entire Star Wars saga. And this is our 3-part series for this particular book. There's a lot of ground to cover, lots of good stories in here, lots of great authors that were involved in the project, so we felt it was most appropriate to split it up into 3 different parts, kind of get our hands around each and every story, each and every lesson we learned, and throughout this whole journey, alongside me is going to be the one and only book guru herself, Sarah Haas. Sarah, you read a lot of books, so that's why I called you the book guru.
I do read a lot of books. I think I'm at 103 this year, and 2 of those being the From a Certain Point of View stories. So I'm really glad to be here talking about all things Empire Strikes Back today.
Yeah, you crammed those books in really quick, so I'm super proud of you, honestly. Go you.
I try.
And for our first part of the series, we're going to be covering chapters 1 through 13, and our guest on this episode, so happy to have her as a first-timer on Friends of the Force, Amy Richau. Amy, how is it going? Welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So excited, and it's been a big week for you, first and foremost, and before we get to that little tidbit, would you mind telling our listeners a little bit about yourself in case they're not familiar with some of your previous work in the Star Wars community?
Sure. So I'm a fan, not surprisingly, of Star Wars. I have a website called 365 Star Wars that basically started in beginning of 2018 when I did a project called 365 Star Wars Women, where I profiled a female character or creator every day of that year. And I've kind of kept it going, not every day, because that's crazy. I discovered and not fun after a while. But I'm on day like 550 something. I think Frog Lady was today because she's amazing.
Yes.
And I didn't want to wait for her name to give her a day because I love her and I'm obsessed with her. And you can also read some of what I've written about Star Wars on starwars.com and starting next month, Star Wars Insider.
Awesome. That's exciting. Yeah, Star Wars Insider is getting a big revival, I think, with some of the High Republic comics coming out, and I'll look forward to what you wrote in there. Lots of good stuff coming. And for you too, and speaking of books, you just announced a new book yesterday that you're writing, a Star Wars book.
Yeah, no, it's like a dream. I mean, I made a joke that it was a dream tweet, but like, it's not a joke, it's true. Like, so there is a new book coming on January 12th. It's a DK book, Star Wars, I Love You, I Know, Lessons in Love and Friendship. And, it's just a book that kind of celebrates love from all different kinds of relationships all throughout the Star Wars universe. And, I'm really excited about it and hope people will check it out.
Yeah, I have to say that I really enjoyed looking at the preview pages on Amazon yesterday, and I am really excited to pick it up. It looks like it's going to be really fun, and I have already liked what I saw. So I'm really excited for you and that project, and glad to have you with us right after that was announced.
Thank you. I like with the preview. What's funny with the preview pictures, they picked 2 Poe ones, which I thought was great because it's like Poe loves everyone. Poe has love. I could have written an entire book just about Poe and Poe and this
Honestly.
person, and that person. Like,
Yeah, absolutely. I love the back of the book. It says this book is, quote, perfect for the scruffy-looking nerf herder, mentor, or long-lost sibling in your life. This book brings you lighthearted relationship guidance from a galaxy far, far away. And of course, you hit me right in the feels with the Shmi picture on the back that says, "What does your heart tell you?" I can't believe it. Oh, we miss Shmi.
Nice. Yeah, I do love Shmi. I was like, we gotta have a mom, and there, is any mom better than Shmi? I mean, there's not a competition. Maybe Frog Lady, but
I mean, the moms we do have in Star Wars are great. Briha, I mean, we appreciate moms, even though sometimes moms do not get appreciated in Star Wars.
Yes. Mom's tragedy, Star Wars.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really excited for that book, and just once again, congratulations. That's such a huge privilege to be able to write that, and I think it's probably been a long time coming for you, just with all the work that you do on 365 Star Wars and your StarWars.com stuff. So big congrats. So I hope you've been celebrating as much as you can.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely a thrill. I feel very, very lucky to have been given this opportunity, especially in like such a completely bonkers and sad year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll pull any happiness we can, and I think there's going to be quite a bit of that today, and many of the stories that we're talking about especially. So once again, for those of you listening, we are covering chapters 1 through 13. So we're going to be starting with Eyes of the Empire and ending with The Dragon Snake Saves R2. We'll kind of go through each chapter and talk about the biggest lessons that we pulled, some of our favorite moments, and we'll just kind of have a ball with it. And I'm really excited because some of these stories that we start with in this book take place on Hoth, and that's kind of why we split it up in this way, kind of the Hoth section. So very, very excited. So Amy, I would love to start with you, and just in terms of your thoughts on The Empire Strikes Back as a great film, in the long line of Star Wars films, and why you think that, at least for me, I was really excited more so for this one than from a certain point of view, for A New Hope, because I just think Empire Strikes Back is so rich with drama and love and Bespin, this huge grand city. There's just so much going on. So where does Empire stand for you and your Star Wars fandom, and how excited were you for this book when it got announced and once you got into it?
So I don't really rank the Star Wars movies very much, but if I had to pick a favorite, it would be The Empire Strikes Back. It was the movie that I probably watched the most when I was growing up. So I think that probably it still would rank among my first one. I think that what was fascinating about the challenge of doing a 40-story book about The Empire Strikes Back is there aren't that many major characters in it. And so that's something that I thought was immediately, exciting, because like there wasn't like a cantina so much of like, dozens of characters. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting challenge. I interviewed Elizabeth Schaefer from Del Rey Star Wars as part of the original 365 Star Wars. And I was like, I know you can't tell me, but will you please tell me if there's going to be an Empire Strikes Back, or, from a certain point of view. And she said, like, on the little side, she's like, I can't say anything for sure. I don't know anything for sure, but like, I wouldn't be surprised. And I like took a little snapshot of that and sent it to her the day that they announced it, which was like several years later. And I was like, yes, it happened.
You're like, I remembered. I was waiting.
I know, I was just like Palpatine playing my long game,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the build up to the book was so interesting, and we got teased so much, especially the week of and then the day of with Tom from Del Rey's cryptic tweets. So it's really fun to think that was the same year somehow, but also how far we've come to finally now read these stories. And I think you hit the nail on the head by saying a lot of characters we wouldn't think of in this book, because it's not as obvious as the creature sitting in the cantina, or the Tusken Raiders, or all the different Death Star Imperials walking around. So it got a little more creative in many instances. But what were your overall thoughts on the book, Amy, and what did you think of it? What worked, what didn't, what surprised you, all those sorts of things?
Well, I really loved it. I liked that it was a combination of hearing from some larger characters like Palpatine, or like Boba Fett and stuff like that. Like you get that. You get like some of the more smaller characters, like we'll talk about like Torrin Farr, and like you get like a little bit more of like the bounty hunters that you don't really hear from so much. But my favorites are usually the stories that are new characters, because like when I was little, like in the 80s and 90s, like, daydreaming about Star Wars, like what I would do is I would insert myself as a new character, or I'd like place myself like as a character, who is like in the background, and like imagine that I was kind of part of the adventure. Like that was a huge part of my fandom when I was younger. And I still do it, sometimes. I mean, you just kind of, daydream about like being in the adventure. And I think that these books really do an amazing job of giving you that kind of thrill, and also like every time, when I watch A New Hope, and I have not watched Empire Strikes Back since I've read this book, but like I'm now going to think about certain things a little bit different. And I think that that's a great gift for a movie that I've seen like a bajillion times, that, that now there are kind of fun new things to think about.
Did you have a particular favorite story in the book? It doesn't have to be necessarily the ones we'll be covering today, but amongst everything.
I think that if I had to pick two, I can't pick one. The Witness, I really loved, by Adam Christopher. And then I can't remember the name of the one that was about L3. I really loved that one. And that was interesting because like I don't not like L3, but like I'm not a huge L3 fan. And so if you would have told me that was going to be one of my very, very favorites, like I probably wouldn't have believed you. But those were the two that I found myself like refusing to put down. And I actually almost missed picking up my kid somewhere from like an appointment because I was reading The Witness. And so like that's a pretty good compliment, I think, because I was just like, no, like those two are probably my favorites, but I really like overall, like even ones that don't hit as much, like I don't think that there's a bad one among the bunch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree. And I definitely have to also agree on The Witness. And it's Faith in an Old Friend. It's by Brittany Williams, is the L3 story. And that story, again, I'm actually not a huge fan of Solo. The movie just didn't totally work for me. And I loved that story. So it really, I think, brought such life to L3 in that new role and the ways that she was kind of making a difference for the Falcon in that story. So I have to totally agree on both of those stories. The Witness was also, I think, really exciting as the character quite literally witnessed a lot of these moments, whereas the book, a lot of the stories aren't like that at all. So
I echo much of what you said, Amy, and I actually just watched The Empire Strikes Back before we were recording this, putting in some final notes, and there were definitely parts where I was like, that. I will say the thing that hurt the most was seeing Han cut open the Tauntaun this time, just because there's now so much history with that particular Tauntaun. So I was a bit traumatized there, but there are so many instances where I think these books build out the Star Wars universe and these movies, and just the fact that you can reinterpret something 40 years after watching it for 40 years and studying it so much, and it still teaches you something new, teaches you new lessons that are important, not just for Star Wars and rebellions and empires, but also for our own lives and some of the empires we face in our own lives too. And I think a lot of that was a lot of the tones in this book and a lot of the different things that felt very rooted in reality, I think were on purpose, and also really just fleshed out the rebellion and that story. So it's just great. It was just so much fun. And I'd love to know, too, from your perspective, Amy, what do you feel as kind of the importance of projects like this, whether it's speaking to the actual content itself or also just like the publishing world of Star Wars, and like what kind of benefit this sort of book gives us over just individual books by like one author?
I think that it really shows the beauty of a short story. I don't think a lot of people read short stories, and I know that Star Wars Insider is going to start having more kind of short fiction, which I think is great too, because I don't read very many short stories, and so it was a great excuse for me to kind of dive into that world. I think that the best benefit for Star Wars is it brings so many new writers into the universe and kind of, not tries them out like they're not going to do well, but like, you get to see if they're like a fit for this franchise, a fit for like how Del Rey works or however it works, and really gives you just these amazing amount of people who want to see Star Wars. And some of them are, most of them are so well known for doing things other than Star Wars that people might buy this book that normally wouldn't buy a Star Wars book and might kind of be like, Star Wars book, like, no, like, what is that? Like, I don't read a Star Wars book. Like, I just see the films. Like, maybe I watch the TV shows, but I don't read Star Wars books. I think that it might, like, people who love Hank Green might be like, I like Hank Green. I'm going to buy all of his stuff. So, like, I'm going to buy this book. And I mean, Hank Green's story was amazing. I loved it. But I think that, I think that most people who buy it will probably enjoy more than just his story. And then they'll kind of understand that Star Wars fiction is great storytelling. It's not, I think that people just kind of think of it as like not real or like not as good as like, I think that a lot of IP fiction, like, like it's just, you're just kind of copying a story or you're not being original. And like, it's not like that. And so, but, until you kind of try it, then I think it'll be a good kind of entree for people to try out Star Wars books if they haven't been.
I'm the biggest stan of Star Wars publishing. Sarah, I think you agree there.
We love Star Wars publishing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that this book, in addition, for Star Wars readers who may not read super widely outside of Star Wars, I know some people who just are like in on the Star Wars. I read Star Wars books pretty much singularly for about a year and a half. I went through a lot of the new canon, and it really introduces Star Wars readers to a bunch of perhaps new authors that they haven't read from yet. There are some authors in here that I hadn't heard of or had heard of but hadn't read anything from them yet, whose books I am now like racing to the library and the bookstore to grab. And I'm really glad to see their voices in Star Wars too, just as a way for me as a Star Wars reader to get to know their voice as a writer a bit more. And so I appreciate that aspect of it as well. And there are a bunch of, or a handful of authors who are fairly new to getting their works published. That makes it really exciting to see what they're going to do next. And people like Tracy Dion and Brittany Williams and Karen Strong, they only have a couple of things out, or just one book out, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do next as well.
And I could honestly see like any one of these people writing another Star Wars book. So it's a matter of, do they want to keep doing it? Do they want to pitch something new? And that's really exciting. It kind of builds that confidence for them to say, hey, I have a great idea. Here it is. And then we might see a book by one of these people in the near future. So that's just amazing. One final thing to note too before we get started is for this book, the same as the first one, the first anthology, all the authors have foregone their compensation for this book, and they're donating it to First Book, which is an organization that works for getting resources and educational materials for underprivileged people. And Disney Lucasfilm as well as Del Rey have also each donated $100,000. So combined, everything totals to about $1 million value. So that's really awesome too, that this whole project was for a charitable cause. And I hope that, moving forward, they continue to do that with each iteration of From a Certain Point of View. So very exciting stuff. We're going to get into the chapters now. So we're going to start with Eyes of the Empire by Kirsten White. So this was an unexpected chapter to start from. I never thought of the sort of grunt work of the Empire, of how they sifted through all of the different probe droid footage and like when they knew which planets to go to. Who was watching that? Is it automated? Is it not automated? But it turns out it's just a room full of Imperial workers, on their computers, eyes are being strained, they're dry, they want to go to sleep, but they got to sift through thousands upon thousands of droids as part of Project Swarm. Amy, I know this is one of your favorite stories in the book. What impression did this story leave on you, and what did you ultimately pull away from it?
It was one of my favorites of the book, and so it was an amazing way to start. I think it was interesting to go. I always think that the stories where you humanize the people in the Empire are interesting. Because the woman who is in this story, first of all, I like anytime you insert a woman into the Empire Strikes Back. Because I'm like, oh, I can put her in 365 Star Wars. Yay. So, that's always every time I'm like, ha. I'm always happy about that. But, when you kind of hear her story about before she was an Imperial, she just was bored and wanted an exciting life. And, even though her parents were kind of, no, you don't want the Empire, she just wanted excitement. And that's relatable. I think that sometimes you don't know what you're getting into and you're trapped someplace boring and in your family and you just want, an escape. And so I thought it was a great way of humanizing her. I thought it was a great way of kind of kicking it off about, the two giant forces of the rebellion and the Imperial kind of closing in on each other. And the ending of the story was amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, what did you think of Mayla's story and her background with her mom building these droids, having that droid eye in her pocket all the time, and then ultimately realizing that even though she was going to these places and only really seeing them, she was also leading to the actions that were taking place there and having to live with that, ultimately, that kind of tragedy and the realization of what she's done. It's not just the eyes, it's also the body and the actions.
Yeah, this story really took me by surprise in the fact that it was a hit right in the first story. And it reminded me of, there's a movie starring Helen Mirren called Eyes in the Sky. And it's about drone pilots and the toll that takes on them and in real life war. And that's the vibe I got from it. And I say that as a compliment because it, again, humanized Mayla in a really interesting way. And again, there's this very human cost and human choices that happen all throughout war, and I think this is something that we see throughout this book that is on display here. And I thought it just was a really stellar story to see the guilt that she feels and the ways that her choices and her actions so far away from the action itself have these major ripples, and what the choice she ultimately makes in the end, I think is really powerful and a great way to start this anthology on a bang.
Yeah, I mean, seeing Luke's X-Wing on Dagobah and deleting the footage, quote, seeing clearly at last, that was a pretty powerful line, you know, and just realizing that even though you did some bad things, you led to the destruction of one planet, maybe you can save the next one and right your wrongs that you've had. And I think, again, it goes back to sympathizing with some of these people in the Empire who don't necessarily like all the bad stuff, but they just wanted that feeling of adventure. She wanted that feeling of traveling to distant worlds without actually having to go to them. And yeah, it was just a powerful story overall. So our next story is Hunger from Marco Shiro. You would think the Wampa is a creature that is just driven by like hatred and the need for survival, which it's driven by survival for sure, but there's this whole added layer of like survival for whom? Just itself, or an entire colony of Wampas, or like an entire family of Wampas. Yeah, I think ultimately it's just great anytime you can paint a creature in Star Wars as not necessarily an enemy, but maybe a misunderstood being. And I think oftentimes, especially like with something like Frog Lady, I think that's another good example of like we see a lot of creatures are usually just for the background or for scary aspects of Star Wars, but to really get inside the minds of these beings that don't look like us and understanding what drives them, what motivates them, what they care about, that's always really powerful. Amy, what did you think of Hunger and the Wampa story and how you might look at that, you know,
Yeah,
that scene differently?
The first line, which I wrote down in my notes, the ice cared for no one, I thought was like that's probably the best first line in the entire of all the stories in the book. I thought that was just, you know, because you're really understanding how brutal Hoth is and how it's like how everyone is really just out there to, you know, survive. And I always, you know, the Wampa's hungry, like, aren't we all? Like, you know, and so you can always, like, this is like trying to do his, you know, his thing. And so I do love when they, I love the stories where they, you know, talk, you're looking at from a creature's point of view, because really, like, you know, the villain in one person's story is the hero in somebody else's.
Mm-hmm. I love the small detail, by the way, of the Wampa using its own saliva to hold up Luke in the cave. That was an interesting choice, but great job, Mark. Good job.
It's a little gross.
I know, it is kind of gross, but Star Wars is weird. Got to keep it weird, you know? Very on brand.
So while Hunger wasn't like my favorite story of the bunch, one thing that I did find really interesting that stood out in this story was the idea of like the nature and the wild and order of things being interrupted by people and destruction and war, and the way that this Wampa's life will not be the same because the rebels decided to build a base and bring the war to Hoth. And it was really sad in that way, that not only was his family broken up and you know, was he on his own, but that his landscape was destroyed. Even though the ice cares for no one, I felt that this story really showed the destruction of nature of these places. We often think of like the people toll of war, but not necessarily the place. Even though we get things like Alderaan completely exploding, but you know, I don't think we think about the people of Alderaan, which is why a story like Eclipse in the first one is so powerful. So yeah, that's what I have to say about Hunger.
That's a great point too, because you think of Hoth as a barren wasteland that has no life, but this book really does illustrate there is a lot of life on Hoth. It is a vast ecosystem of things that are happening beneath the surface, especially. And I think there are 3 stories in the part that we're covering right now that speak to that, and like the human impact on our environment. And yeah, this is definitely one of those stories, and we'll get to a couple later on. So
our first catch of the day.
Stand by, ion control. Fire.
Sarah, I know you're a big Emily Skrutsky fan. She wrote Ion Control, which stars Torrin Farr. Amy, I also know this is one of the characters you predicted who would be included, and from a certain point of view, Empire Strikes Back, the woman at the terminal with the big giant screen. I believe she was on your list.
I would have been that. I'll just tell you right now. I would have sent some harsh like, what are you even doing over there?
You wrote a whole 40-story anthology and you didn't include Torrin Farr? Jeez, guys, get it together.
Exactly.
Yeah. I gotta say, like, stand by, ion control, fire is like one of the most memorable lines from the film for some reason, and I'm so glad I know more about that character. But Sarah, what did you think? Emily Skrutsky, author of Bonds of Brass, which you love that book, coming into the Star Wars universe, and what did you think of this story?
This is probably one book plug of many, but read Bonds of Brass by Emily Skrutsky. It is a fantastic book, and you all deserve that read in your life. I really enjoyed this story. I really appreciated a name for Torrin Farr and the role that she really plays, and the way that the rebellion was betting on Han and Leia, and who was gonna if they were gonna leave, if will they, won't they? And I thought that was pretty hilarious. I also thought it was really interesting. We get throughout these Hoth stories is talking about the transports and getting people on the transports to go, and that gave TLJ parallels to me, as well as the fact that it was called Bright Hope, and that she worked really hard in the trenches for this rebellion. And this was a story that I thought was just very interesting, and one that I definitely would want to revisit as I watch the movie.
Mm-hmm. Amy, now that you know more about Torrin Farr, what makes her stand apart from some of the other rebels that we've come to know, and what did you ultimately take away from her story?
Well, I love that she was just, she's really, really good at her job. And I think that like when because like most people know Torrin Farr as like the only other woman that speaks other than Leia in The Empire Strikes Back. And like her line is, like you said, she's like ion control, and then there's a pause, and then fire. And this short story really gives you an idea of all of the work and all of the dedication and all of her brilliance that like leads to that moment that's like a little bit of a victory for the rebellion right when they're up against complete annihilation. Mm-hmm. I also like that it had her sister, I don't know how you say it, Tana, but like that character, her sister, was in some Legends, and I always think it's fun when authors pull from Legends. She was a pilot. She was a snowspeeder pilot, I believe. So I thought that was great. I will echo Sarah that Bonds of Brass is an amazing book that everyone should read. But to me, like one of the like beyond like getting a better sense of Torrin Farr, like which really actually like it might seem ridiculous, it meant quite a bit to me because I really do love Torrin Farr because like I probably imagined I was Torrin Farr for like several years of my childhood. So I wanted to be there with like Leia, like in Hoth. But I thought that it was some parts of it were so funny. I felt it was like if there was like an Office reboot, like, but it was Echo Base, of all of like the ridiculous kind of banter with it, it really, I like that it kind of, because Hoth would suck to work at. Like, it's cold and it's uncomfortable and you're on top of people and there's no privacy. And I'm sure, tauntauns don't smell good. So I think that,
Tauntaun pellets everywhere.
I know, poor tauntauns. I do love tauntauns. I don't want to insult the tauntauns, but like that whole dynamic of it was just unexpected and delightful.
Yeah, I definitely think we do get a lot better sense of the place in a lot of these stories, and just the senses and the what they're feeling, what they're smelling, what they're thinking. And you get that in A Good Kiss. You get that in perhaps Rendezvous Point by Jason Fry. The one, where that's the Tauntaun Musk that is being pranked upon the different pilots. And you're like, wow, there's actually a lot of depth in this world that we perhaps haven't thought about until somebody really took the time to think about what they would be feeling and smelling and all of these different things.
Yeah, and Torrin Farr truly is, she's like the MVP, right? Because she goes through so much work just to get that first transport off, and they're like, okay, 29 to go. It's like, oh,
Great.
So and you're right, it does build up that moment of how much work actually did go into it, and it even mentions trigonometry, which, like, okay, like, God, bring me back to my high school days when I was just sitting in math class being miserable and trying to understand the hypotenuse or whatever. But it's crazy to think that she has now, it has all led to this moment, but she's had so much practice and so much mental practice that she was ready for it. And I think that kind of speaks to her as a character. She's very forward thinking. She's always in the future of like what's next, because she kind of has to be prepared for that. And that's a bit of what she faces as an obstacle in this story, is this sense of, okay, at some point my crisis of faith is no longer going to hold, and people are going to see that I have a little bit of a seed of doubt about the rebellion, or the Empire is going to find us. And the only reason she's thinking in that mode is because she's so forward thinking. So then by the end of the story, she thinks to herself that all she could do is let the small things carry her convictions in a relay through the moments when it all grew too big to grapple with. And I thought of this as Torrin realizing that, yes, while she has to be prepared for the future and know what's next to come, she should also focus on the small wins and know that even though the Empire is never going to stop hunting them down, those small wins will help her get through. And I think like the transport and seeing her sister and being safe with her sister is like a couple of examples of like what a small win looks like and how that can make a difference, even if you're always on the run. So I thought that was why her story was pretty inspirational.
Star Wars Sisters is the way to go for every new Star Wars story. I was like, take it from someone who just wrote a book about Star Wars relationships. We need more Star Wars sisters.
Are there any other Star Wars sister relationships? I'm kind of blanking right now.
There's Rose and Tico. There's Rose and, and Paige Tico. Yes. There's Satine and Bo-Katan. There's a couple smaller ones. Like there were like some twins, I think, that were in the Clone Wars that were Jedi. There are definitely some of them, but there needs to be more.
Yeah. I feel the same way about mother-daughter relationships as well, because we often see father and son very frequently, and that's why I love a character like Vanessa Doza and Tora Doza. So yes, I'm always a big fan of those sorts of relationships, because we just need more women in Star Wars, and Torrin Farr is just honestly like a great addition to the Star Wars canon, truly. Like, it's great.
And what precisely am I supposed to know?
Come on. You want me to stay because of the way you feel about me?
Yes, you're a great help to us. You're a natural leader.
No, that's not it. Come on. Come on.
You're imagining things.
Am I? Then why are you following me? Afraid I was going to leave without giving you a goodbye kiss?
I just assumed he's a Wookiee.
I can arrange that. You can use a good kiss.
A Good Kiss by C.B. Lee is next, and wowie, what a twist on the iconic hallway scene of Han and Leia fighting in the hallway, and we see Chase Wilsore walk right between them, carrying his boxes. I gotta say, Chase Wilsore is probably the character I related to the most in this book, which I feel so sad saying, but he is just such a goofball. He's so clumsy. He's so uncoordinated. He can't even, grab a blaster out of the air when someone tosses it to him. He's just out there, he's a little different. And I love that we get to see like a rejection letter in Star Wars from General Reekin, who's like, yeah, no, sorry. Like one of those generic emails you get from job apps when they're like, while your skills are pretty good, unfortunately we can't consider you at this time to do more than be in the kitchen of the Hoth base. But I love that he's always like reading self-help books throughout this and practicing positive affirmation and trying to like pump himself up a little bit, that by the end of the story he's willing to take a risk and kiss somebody, his first kiss, somebody he's had his eye on for quite some time, and especially like a gay relationship in Star Wars too, which is great. And they said, Elizabeth Schaefer said, "Gay and in space" is the motto of this book, and they lived up to that. I'm very happy to see that. So, Amy, what did you think of Chase Wilsore as just sort of this kind of rise to the occasion sort of character and turning from almost like an unsung hero in a way?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote down pure hilarity for this one. I think it probably is the funniest of the entire book. This was one that I was hoping was going to be in there. Like when I was kind of like making my predictions, like I was like, who is this guy? Like, it's so awkward. And like one of my favorite lines of the whole book is I wrote down is like, even though he failed basic training 6 times, he remained hopeful, which I think is like perfect. It's like, that is like who I was like, okay, like this is the best. Like, I mean, because he just is constantly failing. But like, people were like, no, you brought me coffee from all the way across Echo Base, like, and it's still hot. Like, you're amazing, which, it's also kind of like the whole office of like Echo Base. But, like, I think it's, like you could have episodes of people getting lost in the hallways and making the wrong turn. I mean, like, it's ripe for some sort of, comedy. But, and then also he made some like reference. I love everyone's kind of disgust about Han and Leia, like, and how like, he referred like, I mean, like not for them personally, but like how he refers to how they were like, they've been pretending to argue all over the base. And like, I love that, like, all of these stories make sure like clear that like everyone knows that they're in love and they, like, and that they're just not admitting it. And they're just like being dramatic. And it's just like, it becomes like an office sport. Like, I think that is really, that is really brilliant. So this one was like huge home run.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with the humor, and also like everybody knows that Han and Leia, like everybody knows. In the last story they were making bets, in this story everybody's rolling their eyes, and it's really fun to see that it turns out that this big base is actually quite small, and everybody knows everybody's business. And Brad, I don't think you give Chase Wilsore enough credit. I think we talk a lot about the ways that he kind of fails, the ways that he isn't quite the hero that he wants to be in his eyes. But he's actually really smart and really good at his job and knows this entire map, this entire layout, and like is efficient and helpful towards others so they can keep going about their day. And I think there's a lot of value in that. And he also gets his happy ending in the end. So there's a lot of good in Chase Wilsore. And I appreciated this character and the story because it really gave us a better sense, again, of somebody who we may not expect, a duty that we may not expect to think about. But it turns out that he's actually a bit of a hero, even in his own way. And I
love it. Love to see it.
I really appreciated that throughout all the humor. And the happy ending, my heart, so warm, so good. Like this is a great fun story that I think again is one of the ones that will make me think differently about that scene in the movie, because it's so awkward when he walks through the middle of it. But now I know this man is on a mission. Yeah, and he's not stopping for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
So
he is the best runner in the base, and that's fascinating because again, you don't have to. He almost has his eyes on the wrong place for much of the chapter. He thinks he's not really fitting in anywhere, and he got kicked off of tunnel making duty when he dropped some tools and sprained his ankle. But yeah, the fact that he was able to go through by the end and rescue people because he just knew the tunnels better than anybody else, and that was kind of his skill. But it's a valuable skill, and that is also a common theme later in Amy Ratcliffe's story about just the ordinary people in the rebellion are actually the ones that do the most good and who carry the most hope. And the first thing that Chase listens to in the story is the self-affirmation that says, imagine who you want to be, use that energy to direct your actions. So he definitely imagined who he wanted to be, and he didn't let all of his mistakes and all of his flubs from previous encounters dominate his life, and he was able to, do some good. And yes, get the kiss. You could use a good kiss. Can't believe he said that. And I don't think he could believe he said it either, but that's sort of the just ditzy, try to go after love sort of moment, but it still works out anyways. And the guy's just like, or Jordan's just like, come here, and it's just kind of that great moment. So it's just so heartwarming.
Hang on, kid. Jacob, This may smell bad, kid. But it'll keep you warm till I get the shelter up.
So She Will Keep Them Warm by Delilah Dawson. Not so happy. A little more sad. Oh man. You know, Sarah, what are your thoughts? I want to go to you first for this story, and just, I don't know. I don't even know where to start. It's a great story, but it also made me so sad. So I don't think I can start.
Yeah, it is a sad one because it gives us a bit of a different perspective on the Tauntauns as a species, what their societies, more or less, look like, and the way that it seems like matriarchs are at the top, from my understanding, which I think is really interesting. But that with the rebellion showing up on Hoth, their ways of life have been totally disrupted. And I think it's really interesting that there is a bit of a battle for dominance in this story. And it is really sad in the end, because we know it doesn't necessarily end super happily for these couple of Tauntauns. And I will say that I love the fact that baby Tauntauns are called Tauntlets.
Yes.
Thank you, Delilah S. Dawson, for that addition to the universe. That is so freaking cute. And then the other thing that I appreciated in this story was that there is that human connection in this story, and that, you know, there are some members on the base that do appreciate the Tauntauns and will spend time with them and talk with them, and whereas not all of them give them the respect. So I found it to be really interesting. This wasn't one of my favorite stories, but I did really value the point of view that it brought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Leia being one of those figures that takes the time to get to know the Tauntauns, not necessarily as creatures that can be used for the rebellion's benefit, but have their own lives, have their own ways about things. And yeah, it is really sad to see their domestication and kind of how they are a misunderstood creature. And even Hank Green's character later on knows much of that too. So Amy, what did you think of She Will Keep Them Warm, and just all of the sad feelings, but also there were some really cute moments that warmed our hearts?
Yeah, I'd forgotten about the tunnelets. That's so funny. I love that. Like, you know, that's great, you know, lore to add to, you know, Star Wars. This one didn't click with me very much, which I was kind of surprised about, because I love Tauntauns and I like most of what Delilah Dawson has done in Star Wars before. It could have honestly just been because I don't want to feel sad about the Tauntauns. I think it's great. Like, I think that having these creature POVs, you know, are great. And I think it definitely will make you, you know, think about certainly a couple specific Tauntauns in a different way. But I think that in my mind, I was kind of rejecting feeling sad about the Tauntauns when I was reading it.
Yeah. Yeah, because just knowing that, you know, the main Tauntaun, Mira, kind of has this whole future planned for herself, and just kind of the dramatic irony that, you know, it's not going to happen is just really sad and made me super sad. So I tried to focus more on the moments of Tauntauns tossing snow to make sparkling rainbows against the white sky, Tauntauns getting their ears or their horns scratched, and how they love that so much. Like those sorts of moments, you know, and it warmed my heart. Also, the Tauntauns' unanimous hatred for C-3PO is really funny. They're just like, that thing is back. He's talking again. Get him out of here. You know, it's just great. Heroes of the Rebellion by Amy Ratcliffe. If you're a Rogue One fan, there's no doubt you would love this story, because it's basically like a Rogue One continuation in some sense, in terms of the actual theme of the story and the character that it centers around, whose name is Corey. And Corey is a rebel propagandist, so she's been in a couple places previously. But Amy, tell us a little bit about Heroes of the Rebellion and what you felt is the core and the heart of this story.
Well, I thought it was great that it was about a journalist, because we don't really hear. I thought it was great that it's a new character, because I really do love that when these stories do that. I thought it was great it was a journalist, because you don't really hear about rebel propaganda so much. You hear more kind of about Imperial propaganda. I love that Amy Ratcliffe wrote it, because she is a journalist, and so I thought that was fun. And what I also really, I mean, I think just the working person's perspective of like how, if you are going to be involved in the rebellion, like how does that work? Like how do you figure out where you're going to go and what you're going to put up with and what you're going to, like, how much of your life you're going to risk? Was interesting. I was really hoping for a lot of kind of an idea of what Mon Mothma was doing during this time, and so I liked that aspect of the story. And I thought she really nailed when the journalist character in the story talks to some of the, you know, core people. I wrote page 71, like, love hands line, and I can't remember it, but I think that she's asking, like, tell me about that moment in Yavin when, you know, you blew it up. And he just has this, like, he completely brushes her off, but it's so perfect. Like, whatever that line is, like, I love it. And I just, like, that is great.
The line is, listen, sweetheart, I'm no hero. I saw a fight and pointed my ship at it.
Yeah, and that's total Han. And so, you know, I think I really do like when in the stories when dialogue, which, you know, all dialogue in, you know, some of these movies ends up becoming iconic just because you watch it like a quadrillion times. But like I love it when they insert the line from the movies, but I also like when characters that we know, you get to hear side conversations. And so I thought that was a really fun part of this story as well.
Yeah, I'm a former journalist, and maybe someday I'll get more back into it, but I really related to Corey in the sense that when I was doing journalism at my school, I was in sports journalism, and a lot of people would go after the big sports, you know, like football, men's basketball, like all these big kind of name things. And oftentimes I found myself being more gravitated towards the smaller sports, quote unquote smaller sports, the sports that didn't necessarily get all the attention, or the players and the athletes who weren't always in the limelight. And that's why I really love this story, because it is about putting the limelight on the more ordinary people, the people that aren't so glorified all the time and put on pedestals. And I think there's a lot of value in that, and kind of taking the idea of hope and what hope actually means, and not being limited to a handful of names, but actually being about everyday people. And even if your names aren't uttered in the cantinas around the galaxy and people don't necessarily know the deeds they do, it doesn't make them any less significant, because everybody has their place and their purpose. And even the guy at the end is like, you know, why do you want to tell my story? Because your story is going to save the galaxy. You're like, that's the essence of what you're doing here.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this story. I love Rogue One. That is no secret. So I love it when my characters from Rogue One are brought up. And it's also how I got a little emotional in Rogue 2 by Gary Whitta. But this story about Corey, I think Amy has done a great job of bringing in this new character and making her feel so real, and showing this side that, you know, we've gotten a little bit of in some of the other expanded universe stories. I believe there was one book, it might have been one of the Padme stories by E.K. Johnston, that had hollows in the middle of it, like breaking up the sections. I might be wrong about that, but there is one where like there is news broadcasts, and so we get a little bit of that, but only ever so slightly. And so I really appreciated Amy bringing this perspective in, and I just found it kind of funny that Corey is in the wrong place at the wrong time. Everyone is busy at Hoth at this point, because there is a battle going on, and she just finds herself there as a journalist attempting to get time with these people who have 1,000 other things to do, you know, which is the job of a journalist often, just in general. And I found it really interesting that we get hints that at this point, the legends about the trio, quote unquote, you know, Leia, Luke, and Han are already forming. Oh, he was from a backwater planet, and now he's like this rebellion hero. And I find it really interesting that we see a little bit of that happening in real time in this story. And I appreciated the collective nature of it. And again, yeah, it is positive, it's hopeful. It kind of decentralizes it from the main trio ultimately by Corey having this experience with this quote unquote like no-name soldier who helps her and ends up getting their story that will ultimately be helpful for her cause and also inspire hope in others. And so I just appreciated the way that this story came together to give us a completely new side of this battle, and all of the all of the things that have to come together for this rebellion to be successful.
Mm-hmm. The emphasis on the everyday people making a difference, I think, is very important to bring light to, because yes, I think the trio get so much recognition and so much of the, oh, this all happened because of them. And that kind of leads more into the next story, which is Rogue 2 by Gary Whitta.
Captain Solo, do you copy? Commander Skywalker, do you copy? This is Rogue 2.
Good morning. Nice of you guys to drop by.
Echo Base, this is Rogue 2. I found them. Repeat, I found them.
Follows Zev Seneska, who famously was like, Echo Base, we found them. Repeat, I found them. He was that pilot, and I think there's a moment in Zeb's story and the Rogue Squadron in general where they lose Commander Skywalker. He's gone missing. So it's like, oh God, nobody has faith anymore that we're going to find him. Like, what do we do if we can't find Luke Skywalker, right? But Leia gives them this sort of speech about, I'm betting on every single one of you, not about if you can find him, but when you will find him. And it's that affirmation once again that you guys are all here for a reason. You have the skills to do this. You don't just need Luke Skywalker to help you through it. Like, you can all kind of reach into yourselves and find out, what it is. Look to the story of Rogue One. Why did we retire that number from Rogue Squadron, right? It's because Jyn and Cassian went down the Scarif, and even though there were overwhelming odds, better than any Zev has ever known, they still had courage and determination. Likewise here, the odds of finding Luke are very low, but can you draw something from within yourself to go out and try to find him? And I think, again, it's just everyday people who make that difference. Amy, what did you think of Rogue 2 and kind of maybe the history behind the Rogue symbol, and also, Zeb's story in the larger scope of the Empire Strikes Back?
Yeah, I think this was a great situation where I'm sure when, they approached Gary Whitta, about writing this, he's like, do you know what you want to write? He's like, you're damn right. I know what I'm going to write. I'm going to write about this. I love too, all of the connections, I love just, we obviously think that the heroes did a great job, but it's also meaningful to hear kind of the, man on the ground, the woman on the ground, hearing them, hearing them talk about the characters that we love. Sometimes it's silly, but sometimes this is they were joking about him and Leia's romance in previous stories, but now people are really looking at people, and this is one of the first ones where you really get an idea of how everyone feels about Luke, and how everyone kind of holds him in awe, but how Luke isn't a show off, and I thought it did a great job of taking this character who, doesn't get a lot of screen time and really just connecting it to all different kinds of, of the Star Wars universe.
Mm-hmm. I love that Gary Whitta finally got to write Rogue 2. He's always joked about it. Just the title itself is just, it's so funny. Sarah, what did you think about the story? I know you love Rogue One, so I'm sure you loved Rogue 2.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, again, as I mentioned for Heroes of the Rebellion, anytime we can bring Rogue One up in the other Star Warses is a good time for me. So when we got, Luke naming the squadron Rogue Squadron, and then there being no Rogue One call sign, I was like, ooh, okay, I'm not gonna cry. It's fine. It's emotional because, especially for them, this is all fairly recent, and keeping that memory alive. And I thought that this story was great, and I thought it was great, of course, that Gary Whitta wrote it. And we get a bit more of the fact that Hoth sucks, and the base at Hoth kind of sucks. It's really not a fun place to be.
It's really not.
And everything falls apart all the time. But one of the things that I loved most in the story is a quote about Leia, and I don't have the page number because I didn't write it down, but the quote says, "She was the embodiment of grace under fire." And again, Gary Whitta out here trying to make me cry. Yes. Leia throughout her entire life went through so much, so much pain and loss and tragedy, and maintained grace and leadership and just tenacious to the core. And I appreciated that one line. It really, really stuck out to me in this story, even though it wasn't about Leia.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lord Vader, the fleet has moved out of light speed and we're preparing to...
You have failed me for the last time, Admiral. Captain Piet.
Yes, my lord.
Make ready to land our troops beyond their energy field, then deploy the fleet so that nothing gets off the system. You are in command now, Admiral Piet.
Thank you, Lord Vader.
So, Kendall, by Charles Yu. This was a trip. This was another sad story. There's a lot of sad stories in this, I have to be honest, which is expected because it's the darker middle chapter. So, like, you have to have the sad with the good, you know, it's all about balance. Powerful light, powerful dark. So it's almost a story about the euphoria of watching your life flash before your eyes. And it was so tragic too for Ozzel, because another instance of an Imperial sympathizing with them, realizing the mistakes that they've made. Why didn't they turn back sooner? Why didn't he recognize the telltale signs of this dark and miserable path he was going down that would ultimately lead to his own destruction? And just seeing him kind of almost blur together his memories and confuse himself, not really know who he is or where his place has been in the universe, only to realize his name in the final moments and realize it's too late. Oh, so sad. It's so sad. Oh my gosh. Amy, were you as sad as I was reading this? Because it was
I know, who thought that they would have feelings about Ozzel?
Right.
Like, I mean, but like
Right.
there really is a whole bunch. This one has a little bit of everything. Like, I mean, there's plenty. Like, I love how it like showed what an obnoxious jerk he was, because he was.
Yeah.
Like, and I love that it kind of leaned into that, and how, like, I mean, he seems very unpleasant to, work for, like, like a bit of a know-it-all. But because of the whole structure of the story about how it's all about, like his final kind of time on Earth, you do get to hear, or not to hear, but you get to kind of through his eyes, see his youth, and then you're just like, there are several times where you're just like, how dare you have, I don't want to have feelings about Ozzel.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people would have really just gone with the obnoxious jerk part and just had it be like over the top in that direction, which is quite funny. I mean, because like he is just kind of, he's pompous, and that's just kind of who he is. But I love that, that Charles Yu just decided to go a whole bunch of different ways. And I love how he framed it. I thought it was a really kind of, you weren't just seeing the same moment through somebody else's eyes. Like, there was all kinds of extra stuff added in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a silent movie playing out before him as his hearing went, as his seeing went. Like, it's all going away. Oh, it's just tragic. Sarah, what did you think?
Yeah, it is tragic. This one is well narrated as well in the audiobook, so I just want to shout out to the audiobook for this story in particular. But this story, it's not a story exactly of like redemption. I don't feel bad for Ozzel, but at the same time it is a story of choices and humanity, and just the reminder that everyone has a person and has a story. And I think, Brad, you texted me earlier this morning, you were like, he was a boy before he, made all these choices that got him to where he was. And it's true. And this story is sad in that way that, yeah, there was once innocence, and he completely lost sight of it, and he lost sight of himself in some ways. And it is interesting to read about, and I appreciated that Charles Yu took this moment that we kind of see as ruthless in the movie, a moment of destruction, into a moment of understanding. And it is the moment of like, your life flashes before your eyes before you die, or whatever. It's that idea, personified very well into these 6 pages or so.
Mm-hmm. There was an interesting element too, that his wife had joined the rebellion, but he didn't want to. And they cried the whole night, and they said their goodbyes in the morning. Like, that's so tragic. And so incorporating that into it as well, and thinking like, why did I ever join the Empire? The door was right there to kind of have both things, have love and have a place that I wouldn't just be choked out. At least getting choked out in person would be somewhat honorable, but over Zoom chat, he says that. He's like, how could I? Oh, okay, he's going to stop at some point. Oh, okay, he's not stopping. This is bad. And he says, how had he not seen it until it was too late whom he had pledged his allegiance to? He was not alone in his complicity, but that did not excuse it either. So right there, he's kind of accounting for his actions and owning them. It says, authoritarians do not announce themselves and knock down your door. They are invited in. And this made me think of Lucas's quote of, democracies are not taken, they're given away. So I thought that was a pretty good parallel right there. And just that, we have the choice. We all have a choice to make. And for Ozzel, he kind of realizes a little too late what that choice could have been and could have panned out to be, because nobody's going to remember Ozzel decades from now. He admits that. He knows, his personal narrative is going to get lost in the grand scheme of things. And really, it's just going to boil down to, in the history books, how much power Vader had. That's it. That's the story that's told. And it's a pretty stark contrast to Heroes of the Rebellion, which is all about every person matters. Every person's story will be told and save the galaxy. But for Ozzel, as a cog in the Empire, nobody's going to care. And that's kind of the most tragic point of it all,
Well, I think that the quote about, the authoritarians being invited in and is fascinating, because in a lot of ways it's real. It's not always they show up on the scene and they're just like, I'm here now, you have to listen to me. It's that people start to accept that, and people start to follow that ideology, follow that belief, and become complicit in their rise, and ultimately find themselves on the wrong side. And I find it interesting that he does find himself on the wrong side, but it's way past the ability for him to make positive change on that choice. Yeah.
Amy, did you have any other thoughts to add on Kendall Ozzel's story, and just the sad realization that, sometimes it can be too late, but the power to realize and then change your actions moving forward is almost a privilege in a way.
I just think it was an interesting way of humanizing him, but not like Sarah said, not like giving him like a full redemption, but just kind of like accounting for the choices he made in life, and realizing that it is a choice. Everyone in the, you do choose sides, even when you don't mean to sometimes, and that ends up having consequences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Feeling all right, sir?
Just like new, Dak. How about you?
Right now, I feel like I could take on the whole Empire myself.
I know what you mean.
Our next story is Against All Odds by R.F. Kwan, who wrote about Dak. This was probably one of my most anticipated stories of the book, and it did not fail to amaze me. Dak is an interesting character. Wow. It's a story about going from complete hopelessness to having hope. Dak was born in chains. He was born as a prisoner. His family was imprisoned I feel like K2SO right now. His family was imprisoned in prison by the Empire, and he knew nothing else. He knew that the planet he lived on was for life sentences only. It's where criminals went, and death was often better than what the prison guards would do to you, and sometimes they put the prisoners on firing squad. It's really, really scary stuff that he had to grow up in. Really bad conditions. He'll never tell a living soul why he's a good shot. That's awful. And it makes the whole idea of I can take on the whole Empire myself, is because even though they are on the bleakest planet in the galaxy, even though they are facing the worst odds of all time, and they are not going to win this battle, even all of those circumstances are much better for Dak than where he started. And to have hope somehow amidst this just chaotic battle that's about to ensue, and for Dak to say something like that just goes to show what he's been through and how far he's come. Amy, what did you think of Dak as a character that we get some more insight to, and just like what he's been through and how he's risen above it all?
I think that Dak was a great choice for a character, because that line that he has, it's such a great line. Like, I feel like I could take on the Empire myself. like you don't really see him very much, but that line really just kind of defined him as a character for me. And I think that he's a character that a lot of us like inserted ourselves into. Like, I'm Dak, I'm flying with Luke Skywalker, like I'm in the midst of it, like Battle of Hoth. Like, if you aren't familiar with Dak, like he basically is he's flying with Luke when they go out for the Battle of Hoth to try to take down the AT-ATs. I felt the same way after I read this story as I did with the A New Hope one with the R5D4, where it's like stab you in the heart, twist it around, like, and then stab you again. I mean, how dare you? How dare you, Delaware Star Wars? How dare you, RF Kwan? Like, how dare you, like, make me, I mean, it is a total heartbreaker. And I mean that in a great way, because it really just brings that character to life. And, you know, he is the everyman just trying to do his best, like, you know, the very last moments of his life, all he's thinking about is the fight that he's in. Like, he's just amazing. And like, you know, aren't we all like big, huge fans of Dak now? We all should be.
Yeah.
If you weren't before, you will be after you read this, because it's really, really quite like, you know, I thought I had some feelings for Ozzel. Like, that's nothing compared to what I'm
like, Dak, we stand. We have no choice but to stand. Yeah. Sarah, did Dak surprise you?
Yes, and huge props to RF Kwong for really, really punching us over and over repeatedly until he fell on the ground. Like, my choir teacher in high school used to do this thing where he'd mimic grabbing the heart. He'd show it like pumping out of your chest, and then he'd toss it on the ground and then stomp on it. He goes, "That's how we want people to make, like, that's how we want to make people feel when we sing."
Oh my God. And he's like J.K. Simmons from Whiplash.
No, he was great. He was really nice. But that was just a really funny thing that he did. And that kind of reminded me of that when Amy, you were talking about the, you know, getting stabbed and twisting the knife and then keep stabbing. It really did that because growing up in this penal colony and where, quote, the Empire sends political prisoners to rot, again, and then, you know, Brad, you mentioned all of this, but, you know, making them serve on firing squads, that's all incredibly dark. And something that comes up a bunch actually throughout, in like 3 or 4 stories throughout this anthology, is the idea of the deep core. And of course I went onto Wikipedia, but it's, you know, even more core than Coruscant is, and some of those Cassian Prime kind of planets. And it's really interesting to think about the ways in which a place like this, it's called Kaelist, I think, was the planet he was born on, is so close in the grand scheme of things to a place like Coruscant. And the way that, you know, you think about Coruscant, you think about the city, the sprawling city, even though in this time it's a bit different than we get it in the prequels. All this hustle and bustle in that life, and then versus the Empire's colony planet where everything is prison and it's awful. And there's a stark contrast there that these places are so close, but they're so vastly different in core ideas. And this story was really sad, and my heart broke for Dak, who throughout the beginning of the story was like, I trust Luke implicitly. I don't have any concerns, you know, with Luke as a pilot. It was an honor to fly with Luke. And while Luke it wasn't Luke's fault for his death, you know, it was death at the hands of pilot Luke, you know? And so it hurts, especially in that way as well. It's a really strong, sad story.
Yeah.
But I'd read it again. Dang it. It's so good.
Have either of you seen the Family Guy Empire Strikes Back special? They had one of the funniest moments with Dak. They get in the speeder, and the guy playing Luke, he says, "I feel like I can take on the whole Empire myself." He goes, Oh, really? Oh, okay, I'll just get out of the ship then. You go ahead. And he's like, all right, I'll do it. And then he like goes out, and you see the snow speeders start to fly off towards like 5 AT-ATs. And then the AT-ATs just go pew pew, and then just it blows up. But it's just like so funny. But I'm glad that's a joking memeable thing like Dak has now turned into probably one of the most hopeful stories that have struck a chord with me, and never would I have thought that. And even in his dying moments, Dak still holds on to hope, and he understands that the funny thing about hope is you just have to get lucky once. And no matter how faint the chance that you might lose, you might also win. And that kind of half full, half empty sort of glass feeling is what gets you through. So rest in peace, Dak. We miss you, bud. So speaking of hope, our next story is Beyond Hope by Michael Morikai. He wrote about Iman Kref, and the biggest thing I took away from this story was that nobody wants this war. They just want what comes after the war. That's the biggest thing. And one of my favorite spins to the story is building on Jyn Erso's line of hope. And Iman thinks rebellions are built on hope, but they end in a better galaxy. Right? So like, what's the purpose of the rebellion? Like, why do we have to hope? Like, what are we hoping for? We talk a lot about hope in Star Wars. Hope, 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 hope. That's the big buzzword, you know? And what does it actually mean? Like, what is the purpose of it? So I thought that was a really cool spin on the idea of hope, and that, you know, everything else doesn't matter unless the outcome is for good, and good for everybody at that. Amy, what did you think of this story and just the idea of going beyond hope?
You know, I think it's a really great title for it. It's not really like something that I kind of expected. I mean, this is really about like the guys on the ground who are like, you know, who really just seem like they have no chance whatsoever. Like, I mean, you know, you see them as like little specks, like you see wide shots of them in the battle just kind of getting picked off. I think if you really like a lot of, you know, battle stories and about the people in the trenches, like this is a great, you know, story right up your alley. But I think that, you know, that added kind of influx of, you know, hope and thinking beyond this battle, even though like it really just seems very bad for everyone who is there. Like I thought that it was a really good contribution to the collection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's another one of those stories that's extra sad, because Iman Kref, I'm putting the R in the wrong place. He also came from, I believe, a war on his home planet that he left, and then he came to this rebellion and he realized that it was like way less, you know, way worse funded. You know, they don't barely have the pieces that they need to get through this, and he kind of goes, why did I leave this thing to come to this thing? And it was the older infantryman, I think, who was the one who said, you know, we want what comes after this war, and that kind of puts it into perspective for him. And Amy, you said they really have no chance. I mean, when it comes to the AT-ATs and people in ships flying around everywhere, these regular old infantrymen like are really the lowest of the low. You know, they're probably in a worse place than somebody like Chase Wilsore, who is a food runner essentially throughout the base. And it's sad to see that sometimes there's a lack of imagination of, you know, what comes after, and that realization, and when that realization hits, I guess, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. He's just like, you guys have elastic bands and good intentions, but what the hell am I doing here? You know, like, how am I supposed to fight? But yeah, it's the strength in numbers. It's the realizing of what the power of what comes after is what drives these people, even though they are literally the biggest band of misfits in the galaxy. They come from all different parts of the galaxy and the universe, and that's pretty awesome. That's pretty damn awesome, honestly. Like that they can bring themselves together to fight for one purpose, and that's I think that's the advantage over the Empire. Yes, the Empire is more funded, but we have more spirit. Yes, we do. We got more spirit. How about you?
Distance to power generators?
17.28.
Target, maximum firepower.
our next story, The Truest Duty by Christy Golden. It's been a little bit, Christy, since you've written in the Star Wars universe, and super happy to have you back. Dark Disciple was one of my favorites, and Battlefront 2, Inferno Squad. She wrote both of those. So I was really happy to see her return to the project to write Veers, which Veers Watch, so happy for you. All these years have finally paid off. Talk about hope. My gosh, those guys must be going crazy. But it was kind of cool to see how Veers considers himself Vader's dagger. You know, he's silent, he's elegant, he's lethal. And in a way, he kind of feels like a Vader fanboy, a Vader fanatic. He loves Vader and he doesn't fear him. He sees him as somebody he can work alongside, and he's really worked his way up through the ranks by following strong leaders. And even in the end, even though he's like, you know, being carried off to get taken care of, he's like, I will not fail you. Like, you are my favorite person in the world. I love you, Vader. Just write a love letter to him, why don't you, Veers? Jeez. But I thought it was just it was kind of a fun story. It didn't necessarily take any huge risks, but I think it was a really kind of fun look at somebody who actually doesn't fear the most villainous, scary person in the entire galaxy. The breathing of Vader calms Veers. Like, this dude's crazy, honestly. Amy, what were your thoughts on Veers and getting more behind his mind?
So I think I have very few notes on this. I literally wrote like, it's a love letter to Veers. And like the Veers Watch guy liked it, and what else can you ask for? Like, who else matters? Like, you know, like did the Veers guy like it? He did. Like, and he did. I agree. Like, Christy Golden is a great writer. I'm not sure if I've read any of her Legends Star Wars stuff, but the two books that you mentioned are two books that I really, really liked. I think that the Inferno Squad one was the first time I read. I think that I had a little bit of a snooty attitude about books that were written about video games. Just because I hadn't really actually read them, and I love Inferno Squad, like love it. Like, I also like the video game, but like, even if you don't ever want to watch a video game, like, that's a really, really great book. I think she did a really great job. I think that what I wanted was a love letter to Veers, and that's exactly what she got. She delivered. So yeah, it was all, you know, 4 stars.
Yeah. Huge shout out to Iden Versio, and we love Iden Versio and Inferno Squad and her whole story. And by we, I mean me, but also I think everybody else here. I also, echo you, Amy, in the sense that I didn't have a lot of notes for this. Brad, you mentioned, Vader's dagger, which was something I took note of. I thought it was really interesting that the AT-ATs on Hoth are called Blizzard Force. I thought that was pretty great.
Makes you think of Dairy Queen.
Yeah.
Dairy Queen Blizzard, isn't that a thing?
Yes, they are a bunch of ice creams.
Yeah.
But
anyways.
Yeah, I did appreciate that Veer's biggest fans really enjoyed the story, and like, that's what they deserve. Good things. This wasn't my favorite of the stories, but it didn't have to be. And I'm like, honestly, totally cool with that. I've never been super attached to Veers in any way, but I do think you like that iconic shot of Veers in the edit. It's pretty fun.
Your tauntaun will freeze before you reach the first marker.
Then I'll see you in hell.
So, Sarah, I mean, even though you weren't the biggest fan of just Veers as a character, I know you're a big Hank Green fan. You've convinced me to buy Hank Green's books as of late. Went to Barnes & Noble and tried to buy one thing, and I ended up buying completely different things. But I'm very excited to read them. And Hank Green in the Star Wars universe is a pleasant surprise for us. He wrote A Naturalist on Hoth, which is our next story about Kel Tolkani, who is just fascinated with nature, and it's so damn admirable, honestly. It's just like, this guy loves his work, and that's what more can you ask for from somebody who's just super passionate about what they do? But this is sort of our last story of the book, I feel like, about the impact of our actions on our natural environments. And there's a pretty hard lesson he learns by the end of it, but kick us off, Sarah.
I will start by saying Vlogbrothers on YouTube has been great this year. If you've been a Vlogbrothers fan in the past but have kind of stopped watching their videos, this year's videos are great to jump back in, John and Hank Green. Also, if you have not read An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green, I cannot recommend more highly. It is a really incredible book about social media in our current age, and it's great. A Naturalist on Hoth is a story that really is unlike any of the other stories in this book, in the sense that most of these stories are written in the third person. And right from the beginning, this is written in the first person, and that makes a difference onto how we understand the character and how I think this story sees the universe that it's living in. And I really, really loved it. I think it is absolutely one of the standout stories in this book. Hank Green, write more Star Wars, please. I will buy multiple copies of those books. I've been a fan of Hank and John Green since for like 10 years. So that's what you're getting with me. But I thought there were some great quotes in the book. One is on 131, and it says, "Nonetheless, in war, sometimes it is your job to die." And I was just like, oh, that's dark. A lot of what I've been saying is, oh, this is dark. But what I loved about this story is that, we get the idea that the ecosystem can never be fully understood. The world, the galaxy can never be fully understood. And for that, it gives him awe, and it allows him to have wonder. And, again, I don't really think that we often think about the unknowable nature of this large galaxy, because we're always thinking so much about the Force and how it connects us, but not everybody is super attuned to the Force, or not everybody uses the Force in the same way. And so I find that really interesting. And then when we kind of hit the emotional twist in this story, and we talk about the destruction, it is amazing. On 140, the quote that said, "I lost faith in my species."
Same.
This destruction was done by us. And it's really, especially in a year that has been such trash in a lot of ways. And I think we look around at our perhaps family and friends and community members and are find ourselves disappointed in the ways that, care for others, right? Or not caring for others. I really resonated with that in the sense that, like, dang, like, things suck. And he's really not holding back on how much things suck for him. Mm-hmm. And yeah, anyway, I think this story is really fantastic. I would love to read more about this character and all of his journals and findings on science. It's so sciencey, which is so Hank Green, which I really, really appreciated. This is low-key a self-insert, and I'm like totally okay with it. More of it, please.
He talked about keystone species. He talked about them. Crazy.
It's great. I'm a fan.
Amy, what are you thinking about Hank Green's self-insert as a biologist / ecologist?
I thought it was great. I think it's really fun to get a story that shows that no matter what you're passionate about, you can be a part of the Rebel Alliance. Like, you can be part of a really bigger fight, even if you're not like a fighter or like, a spy or something like that. Like, your passion can really have an impact on a greater story, even if no one, you're not going to see. I mean, you can probably pinpoint, I probably will at some point be like, that's him, like in the Echo Base things. I'm going to say it's him. I don't know if anyone has. Hank should. He should like take a screenshot and just be like, this is the guy.
This is my guy. Yeah.
Hopefully he will. I think it's fascinating that he chose this because it was such a unique kind of perspective. And I mean, I think just understanding, before the rebels got to Echo Base, like, how did Echo Base come about? Like, you're on this huge ice ball. Like, how did you even figure out where you could be? It's kind of this information that like I hadn't really thought about, but like when it was presented in such a, interesting way that was really anchored by the passion of this guy, like it was really, really, it was intriguing. And I think it came at a good point in this book too, because there's so much sadness and there's so much, stress and there's like, battle going on, that it was kind of, I like the placement of this one because it kind of, it wasn't like there was any, it wasn't like a hilarious, story, but like it was kind of like, it kind of brought me out of the Battle of Hoth and let me see kind of like what you're left with, like what happens, I think that they did a really good job of the chronology, which I think was, I know that Thomas talked about how it was difficult to figure out the order of these stories. Like, I can't even imagine, like, but I really like the placement of this in the anthology.
Yeah, it's almost like a moment of quiet after like the most chaotic thing we've seen, because this is like truly the last Hoth-based story in the book. So it was definitely wonderful. And Sarah, I want to resonate especially what you said in just terms of what humans are capable of and like what our species can do, and the fact that, you know, he spent his whole life thinking he wanted to fight for the rebellion after he saw Alderaan blow up, but then he realized like it doesn't matter which side you're on, like good, bad, like we're all part of this. Like this is at our hands, and that's not like, you know, the Empire, it's us, you know, this is us. And that's kind of a crazy realization. You know, it's not that he doesn't believe in the rebellion, he just doesn't want to be a part of the human species, you know? So I thought the fact that he kind of chose his love of nature and the environment and preserving that over anything else, because that is more important to him. And that's originally how he kind of led his career initially. Everybody wanted to be a pilot, but he chose to be an ecologist because that was what mattered more to him. He wanted to, he didn't care about the larger scope of things. He just wanted to study space slugs and learn about their cool complexities and all of that. It's nature surpasses even the most marvelous human engineering. But yeah, Amy, I think too with what you said of finding your place no matter what you're passionate about, I think that's a good lesson. You'll find your place no matter what, and you can be a space slug loving guy and still fight for the rebellion somehow. So our final one here is The Dragon Snake Saves R2. This is a one-pager by Katie Cook, who illustrated the cutest story. My only thoughts are just ooh-woo. This is adorable. My heart was so cute. I love the dragon snake with the little heart emoji over its head after it spits R2 out. But Amy, what did you think of this illustration and just kind of how it stands out amongst the rest of the written stories?
I love Katie Cook's work. She's done a lot of Star Wars, and all of it is, you know, well worth checking out. I like that they had a visual story in there. I'm pretty sure they did that also for the A New Hope version. I love, you know, I think that's a great idea. To me, like, it's the perfect example of, you know, when you watch The Empire Strikes Back, you probably think the dragon snake is a jerk, and you're just like, dragon snake, how could you eat my precious R2-D2? But, you know, from the dragon snake's point of view, and I'm saying she because I feel like this gave me license to call the dragon snake a girl. She's going to be on 365 Star Wars at some point because she looked like a girl to me. Fair or not, everyone can have their own opinion, but like she, you know, from her perspective, you know, from her point of view, she's like, look, I saved him. Like, you should thank me, you know, like, and I thought that was like a hilarious little kind of twist on a moment that, you know, I was 7 when I saw Empire Strikes Back in the theater, and every moment of Dagobah scared the hell out of me. And I like pestered my dad endlessly about how I was afraid that Yoda was going to hurt Luke. And he was like, will you please chill out? You know, like, I'm trying to, you know, like, it's going to be fine. Luke's going to be fine. But like everything was a threat on Dagobah to me, and certainly the dragon snake was. And it was like, you know, it was like that scene, you know, now I think it's funny, you know, when I watch it now, but like, I remember when I was a little kid, like, I was terrified that the dragon snake was going to, you know, hurt R2. So this is a really kind of delightful, also, like, it's like, it was nice to have something that was purely funny again, because we were talking about how, like, I mean, there's a lot of sadness and a lot of battle and a lot of war. I think that this is kind of, you know, a good little kind of breath of fresh air.
Yeah, it's our palate cleanser for sure.
I would love to highlight the audiobook in this particular moment. The audiobook for the first anthology did not include an audio version of the one-pager comic, which I believe was by Jeff Brown, but I could be wrong. And the audiobook this time around included an audio version of this comic. And it is a lot of like ambient Dagobah noises, a bit of like, you know, R2 noises, some like grumbling. It is 1 minute and 17 seconds of pure joy. I loved it. So I would love to highlight that as well, because they got really, really creative on the audio side to attempt to make this illustration come to life, and they did a really fun job. And when they're paired together, the actual comic itself with the audio, I think it is a really fun experience. So if you have access to the audiobook, I highly recommend just listening to that little bit. But I have a little piece of Katie Cook art in my room. This little rose with a little porg on her head. So I have a lot of fondness for Katie's work, and I think this is so cute and so adorable. And I love the very, very last like panel image of like the dragon snake waving to like R2 and like R2 like waving back, and there's like a little heart in the corner, and
So
like it's
cute.
just so sweet. And again,
on the dragon snake are just adorable.
Yes, and
just trying to help.
Yeah, it's good natured, just trying to be a pal. And I loved the levity of this and the different tone of the Hank Green story after those 4 or 5 or 6 stories that were kind of heavy, and they were all kind of about the war, capital W. And so I appreciated this breath of fresh air, and I'm really glad that Katie's work was included in this anthology.
Yeah, and what a story to go out on before we turn into the space portion of it all. And it was just, yeah, I love having that just moment of relaxation of going, okay, it's like a nice 1-page heartwarming comic. And yeah, like you said, Amy, just the dragon snake is terrifying, especially as a kid, and you watch R2 come out and start spitting up mud. That always concerned me. I was like, geez, that guy went through some stuff. But really, the dragon snake did save him. So it's just a nice little twist on something that could easily scare you as a kid, and it's not so bad. So I would love to see the dragon snake. By the way, dragon snake did make an appearance in the Lego holiday special as of late, so that was a surprise, gotta say.
I will say that I watched that scene in the Lego special with the knowledge of this story, and I definitely smiled to myself. I was like, oh, she's just trying to help, So I definitely looked at that with a kinder eye, and I really appreciated those 2 pieces come together. And I bet when I go back and watch The Empire Strikes Back again, which, like you, Amy, I haven't gotten the chance to watch since finishing the book, I will look at that scene and smile.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that is it for part 1. This was very exciting. These were some pretty heavy-handed stories, but I think each of them had something really, really important to say, regardless of if they were your favorite or not. And I think that's kind of the point of what we're doing here, is we want to go through each story in 3 parts and give them each their well-earned time, because I think there's something you can take away from each one. And that's sort of the challenge with these books is, okay, yes, you can speed read through it and be done with it and move on to your next Star Wars book. But the exciting part is to really sit with each of them and dissect them and figure out what clicked and what didn't. And Amy, do you have any final thoughts on the book before we close out officially?
I mean, I think thank you for having me on, first off. Like, this was really fun. Like, I really did enjoy this collection. So it was great to kind of like have an excuse to go back and reread some of them. And this is just the beginning. Like, I mean, there's lots more, in the book, some of my very favorite stories, come on. So I really encourage everyone to read it. But, I hope that more short stories are a part of Star Wars future, because I think that is, it's a great part of the publishing kind of push.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you if there is another From a Certain Point of View in the near future or in the far future. Is there a movie that you want to see From a Certain Point of View for? Like, is there one that you could travel forward in time and grab a copy and bring it back and start reading it, which one would you choose?
I mean, I think this is boring, but I actually do think that I would say Return of the Jedi, because having grown up with the trilogy, it really, these are the movies that I kind of inserted myself into, more like I'm a spy and I'm in Jabba's palace. I'm hiding behind Palpatine's throne, those are the that, flying through young Amy's mind. So I probably would pick that one, but I hope they do them for them all. I feel like I'm too old to wait for 40 years for all of them. So I hope that they might, pick up the pace a little bit. But I think it's a huge endeavor for Don't Waste Star Wars to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't think that they probably think that, which I understand. But I do hope that it is successful enough to warrant another one.
Yeah, I think I think your favorite's not far off. I'm sure with the success of this, they'll do it again in 3 years for 40th Return of the Jedi, and maybe they'll do 25th anniversary or 30th anniversary for the prequels. But there is a lot of Star Wars to explore, and these books are just such a joy. So thank you for your perspective today and what you brought to the discussion. I think it was a ton of fun. I can speak for Sarah and I in saying that, and hopefully again at some point in the future you'll be back to talk more Star Wars. But where can our listeners find you online? What cool work do you have coming up that you wanna plug here? And yeah.
So you can find me. My website is 365starwars.com. And on Twitter, there is a 365_Star Wars Twitter account, but I'm much more active on my personal account, which is AMYRICHAU. And it feels completely surreal to say this, but you can pre-order my book. Woo! Star Wars, I Love You, I Know, from any shop. I really liked what Amy Ratcliffe did, where she paired with a local indie for her thing. I was just thinking that, like, you know, I know everyone usually you revert to Amazon, but I want to be one of those people who buys more from local books. So I'll have to try to figure out if I can hook up with somebody. But, you know, I hope people pre-order it. I hope people enjoy it. And thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, big congratulations for the book. And I'm sure many people are going to really just enjoy it, especially around Valentine's Day. It's pretty close to that point in the year next year. So that'll be exciting. So thank you, Amy, once again. So excited to have you on the show. And if you want to listen to part 2, you can go ahead and do so in just a couple of days, or if you're in the future, you can listen to it right now. We are going to be joined by Maggie Lovett from the Star Wars Friends podcast. So until then, everybody, may the Force be with you always.
Friends of the Force is a proud member of the Star Wars Escape Pods network. To learn more about our sister shows, find us on Twitter at We Are Escape Pods. The Star Wars Escape Pods network, promoting positivity in fandom.